All right, everybody, welcome to our first official webinar series or webinar for our spring term, which is strategies for advocating for students and transformative pedagogies, hosted by our advisory coach and all around good person, Dr. Jamie Thomas. We have a little bit of stuff before we get to the good stuff today. We're going to just give you a preview of our February events, show you that QR code for our spring calendar. Then we'll get on to Jamie's section, and then we'll conclude just with some final notes to take with you before you head off into your weekend. Special thanks to all of our advisory coaches, Marie-Tez, Jamie, Gayatri, Alan, Tyrone, Anna, Cindy, and Husna, and to our program team, James, Liz, Joy, Kim, and again, Marie-Tez. Thanks for doing everything that you do. Okay, so this is our month ahead for spring. First, on February 14th, you have your first spring reflection due in Canvas. So please make note of that. On February 21st, we'll have our second webinar, which is going to be on Indigenous knowledge and OER, hosted by Anne-Marie Paikai from the University of Hawaii. And March 21st, we have a webinar, a very important webinar that I think everyone will have a vested interest in, which is the changing landscape of DEI, considering all of the changes that we are already seeing happening on the federal government level. Oh, and if you want to see the whole schedule for the spring, please scan the QR code. If you need OER support, you can contact oer@canyons.edu for OER search and formatting help and to set up individual or team consulting time. I get some emails from time to time from people who have missed a webinar. This policy is listed or is in Canvas, so you can see it there, but here it is again for you. Attending your monthly webinars is required. If you scan that QR code and go to the calendar, it will show you specifically which events are required. But things happen, a lot of things happen, especially since the first of the year. And sometimes you can't make it. So if you can't make a session, that's totally fine. Just let your coach and team leader know and view the session as soon as possible. We send out that link, the recording link, within 24 to 48 hours of the event. Watch it, and when you're done, you can visit the required webinar makeup discussion area and just give us a couple of sentences, maybe a short paragraph about your thoughts about what you saw, and that'll be all good.
Great. Well, now it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce one of my favorite people in the whole world, really, Dr. Jamie Thomas. Jamie has been kind enough to be an OFAR coach with us since 2021. She's also a facilitator with @ONE, and that's where I first met Jamie. I had the great good fortune to be assigned to co-facilitate a course with her, and holy smokes, she improved my teaching just being with her. She's also Dean of Social Science at Cypress College and an adjunct professor of linguistics at Cal State Dominguez Hills, where she won an award for distance education teaching. Congrats, Jamie. I didn't realize that. That's awesome. And she's got a really stellar background, having taught at Swarthmore and Middlebury. And she does not include this in her biography, but she is a multiple time published author, a couple of books under her belt and lots of peer-reviewed articles, serious scholar. So we're really, yeah, we are very happy to have her in the community college family. So without further ado, Jamie, please take it away with strategies for advocating for students and transformative pedagogies.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'm going to share my screen in just a second. And as I'm warming up, I want everybody to kind of think about what are the things that you do in your teaching already and what you've already planned with your action plan for this semester with regards to bringing anti-racism into your teaching. So I think I can share now and hopefully keep this fairly interesting for you. So right now, I think you're seeing my screen, and I want to make sure too that I'm sharing audio. So maybe we'll check that in a moment. But shout out to the Laney College team, because that's my jam right now. And I think we're really vibing this semester, all of us, on what we can do with our students, but also how we can communicate that in multiple ways. So thinking about what transformative pedagogy actually is in practice, and then also how do we prepare for those folks who can be detractors or naysayers, and how do we build trust beyond words? And then, opportunities along the way in this presentation for us to kind of think about our own experiences, trying to bring change to our classrooms, our colleagues, our campuses. So I wanted to begin with just a moment of serenity, maybe, at the Chavez National Monument. I'm visiting my sister off and on. She just moved to Bakersfield, and had a chance to do a drive-by on Bakersfield College, which was pretty cool. And in between Bakersfield and Tehachapi, and if you're in that region, you sort of know this area, there's a small place called Keene. And that is where Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and others were organizing and spending a lot of time. And so now there's a national monument in his honor and his wife's honor there. And it's pretty cool because it's this really calm place, but it's where they're also interred. And one of the quotes that's on the monument there is by Chavez, where he says, "Es mi más profunda creencia que solo al entregar nuestras vidas encontramos la vida." Where we give our lives, we find life. And I really appreciate this as kind of an inspirational quote, but also this idea that it's by collaborating with others and learning from others that we, in turn, build our own lives. And of course, I take inspiration too from Dr. Maya Angelou, who says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People may even forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I think that's really interesting because, even this semester, I have at least 5 repeat students. And I'm sitting there in the classroom like, why'd y'all come back? I ain't scared you yet, right? Just kind of thinking about, why do people come back? Why do people want to be a part of something? And maybe it's because of how you made them feel. So I want us to begin with an activity, and this is where I want to make sure we have audio, because we're going to watch a brief video clip from a TV show. And I don't know if you've seen the show before. It's called The Irrational. But it's a show that involves a psychology professor. So those of you who are involved with psychology, I hope you have fun with this. And you probably have a lot of comments, okay? But I want you to listen and watch to the best of your ability. I've added subtitles here too. And I want you to think about what you hear or see. And then afterwards, let's share your impressions in the chat here in Zoom. Okay. So before I get to this, I think I might stop sharing and then reshare, just to make sure that I do this with the audio. But it looks like maybe that's already part of
I
it.
think to control the audio, if you go up to the top portion in your share, there's I can't see it on my end because I'm not sharing, but there should be a drop down option that says share my sound.
Oh, okay.
So on my computer, I'm using a Mac. It's on the right-hand side of that top taskbar.
Share computer sound. Got
Yeah.
it. And it should be mono or stereo. Do you know? Maybe
I
this.
usually do stereo. That seems to work.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you. All righty. And then I'll just get rid of that little thingy. Okay, so again, after you see this clip, try to jot down your thoughts and share something with us in the chat. Okay. Your observe here. Let's go ahead and get your comments in the chat. And hey, this may seem fairly straightforward, but let's just give it a try. Yes, Jesse L. Martin, you know it. If you're a Law and Order nerd, you know it. Okay, Daniel, you kind of heard that is a pirate ship. Totally. I mean, we're hearing like a different accent perhaps too, right? And I get into this because I'm a linguist too by background, so I just love this language stuff. Some of the students started typing before they heard it the fourth time. Chara heard something totally different. She might have felt like she was hearing French. Absolutely. And the more you heard it, Kelly was saying, the more it started to lose meaning. Husna, very great, great observation. Colonizer language in a football stadium. Totally. So you're hearing like different things. And the different things we hear is reflective of our different levels and different context of experience. Okay. The more you heard it, Rhonda's saying, the more she felt like it was an idea that folks were united behind. Absolutely. So it was kind of a sing-song thing. Okay. All right. So now let's watch the continuation of the clip. Okay. And John, you know, you're picturing folks in a soccer game. I think you might be onto something. In this continuation of the clip, I want you to also think about what you hear and see, and then we'll share again in the chat. Like opera? Ooh, I might go to that opera. I don't know, Laura. All right. All right. So everyone just take a moment. This was a little bit weird, right? Write down in the chat what you think you heard. Because now we're dealing with the power of suggestion. Totally, Brandon. Tashia, absolutely. Gayatri said, I heard what I saw. Ah, Bart Simpson bouncing. What the heck? Right, right. So your hearing is impacted by what you see. It has to do with all these different parts of the brain interacting. That is embarrassing. Maybe it's embarrassing, right? That's like all these possibilities can happen, even though we know we're hearing the exact same audio that we heard before. Okay. All right. So what's going on here? Well, something interesting I think, and I love to share this with students, is that when you are hearing somebody else's speech or perceiving and viewing their maybe their hand signals, their hand signs, if it's a visual language, then it goes through a filter of perception, right? No matter what you're taking in. And that has to do with then the ideas that you bring to it, right? So there is a process here. And I'm sharing this visual here for two reasons. One, I wanted you to kind of get a picture of what I was talking about. But two, I wanted to share an example of how I have adapted an OER image, right? So the original image, you can see it underlaid here, and it had two faces in profile, in black profile, with aquiline noses. And it's easy to sort of interpret those faces as being very European in nature. So what I did was I overlaid on the image two different face profiles and made sure that those represented some of the folks that I have in my class, right? And this is one way that we can begin enhancing original OER images with the help of our students. And other ways that you can think of as well. Okay, so here, let's finish up with this lecture and just think about how much better any of our lectures would be if we all had a soundtrack there in the lecture hall, right? Okay, so if we don't see the reality, and the reality that we're actually seeing is a function of what we have ourselves experienced and observed, then we have to think about what our own individual realities are and how those connect with how we perceive the world. So it's really about what is our normal. And I love this little graphic here because it has a fingerprint on it, and everybody kind of has a different fingerprint. And even in linguistics, even if we're speaking all the same languages, my individual voice saying those words is going to sound different than someone else, right? Even though there's something enough in common where we can understand each other. So our special ways of seeing things have to do with also how we interact on the campus and in the classroom and how we learn from each other, right? So I appreciate that you're already beginning to think from your own perspectives about some of the images, the sound that we're encountering. And Kara, you are thinking about our retinas and how unique those are. And absolutely, I mean, that's how we end up having prints of our retinas, because they're almost like fingerprints as well. They're very unique. All right, so I want to share with you here a sample article that I use in my teaching. And this is an article about deaf women in college, deaf women of color, and their experiences and their success. And I'm going to share a link now to the first couple resources that I provided for you. And so here you'll get a link to the video, the OER, and then also this article. And so in this article, what I think is really cool, and why I like to share it with students, is it begins, if they don't already have contact with deaf communities and disability, they are able to kind of start thinking about things from a different perspective, and particularly the college experience. So 1 in 20 individuals as of 2005, and I don't think this statistic has changed too much, identifies as deaf. And notice we have deaf in the lowercase and the uppercase meaning the cultural community of deaf folks. And hearing people have been dominant, and we've labeled deaf people disabled. And this also shares there's about 30% of students, of deaf students are successful at completing college. That would mean that 70% of deaf students don't make it through college, right? And we don't exactly know all the reasons why, because we're not doing enough research on this with attention to all of the diversity that deaf communities contain. Right. And so this researcher, Lisa Stapleton, is sort of saying that the voices and perspectives of deaf folks of color have been left largely invisible. And that's something to kind of consider. So as I roll out this type of content in my classes, my inbox starts to fill up. And you may experience this as well whenever you're trying to add something new to the environment. And so, for example, I get an email from a student. And in this case, it's a student that is experiencing a problem with what I'm teaching, okay? This person's been thinking almost nonstop about reading this article, right? Despite their minimal involvement in the class. And then they immediately start talking about their class position. But say, intersectionality, oh my God, this is an ideology I cannot abide. Because it talks about group identities that I cannot claim, right? But what's most important to me is my class status. Okay? I'm getting some of these messages from students, and this was an actual email I got in October 2020, right? And the student even acknowledges that they might come off as dismissive or disrespectful, right? So what's going on here? What are we observing? And I'm bringing this up because some of you may be receiving messages like this as you work on this, and students may be resisting the changes that you're trying to bring to the environment, the transformations you're trying to make in your teaching. But one of the things that I'm noticing here in this particular email is the student is resisting the decentering of whiteness, the decentering of hearing identity, the decentering of maleness and of English even, and the modalities that we rely on as hearing English speakers, right? Listening and writing and speaking, right? Okay, so all of this can be a little unnerving, but this is, I think, our role in what we do. We want to transform those tacit norms that we rely on and that undergird the subjects that we teach most readily, right? And I think this is actually the work of doing anti-racism, because we are trying to get people to think about how what they rely on every day in terms of their center of self is rooted in systems, is rooted in ideas about people and assumptions, okay? Assumptions that aren't necessarily true. So I appreciate how you're adding into the chat that we're thinking about decentering social power. We're thinking about all of those phobias that folks might have and are not yet aware of, right? Sometimes it takes being confronted by that to unlock where the hegemony lies. Absolutely, John, right? So let's continue our journey here, because really what we're talking about in some instances is this notion of white default, right? An unnamed normalization of some of these standards of morality, of intelligence, of beauty. And, you know, as I work this semester with my Laney College colleagues, I'm learning a lot from them about how beauty is defined and conceived in the way that we roll out a curriculum around um, hair care and skin care, right? And the types of exemplars we may have in those textbooks and the materials. So we can have a really strong role here as educators in helping students recognize this kind of resistance and move through it, right? Because the end goal, I think, is to walk away from some of the complacency that you've brought up there, Tashia, right? And to also think about how do you unseat that and change what your normal is and build empathy with others, right? It's through the empathy, I think, that we really move forward. And so here's an example I just want to share with you. And working with some of my students, um, we were making presentation slides, right? So I said, okay, you started here, you have different kinds of music, and the student had just put classical music. I said, wow, I feel like there's an assumption here because there's all sorts of classical music genres, right? There's all sorts of classical civilizations. So why don't we specify what you really mean? You really mean European classical music. And just adding that in represents an intervention, right? So there are lots of ways that we can go about helping students to kind of make more visible the assumptions that they actually operate and rely upon. Okay, so just kind of to recap here, when I'm thinking about anti-racism, I'm thinking about transforming those tacit norms that we rely on in our teaching and learning. And then this OER piece is really cool because I think it's about making sure that folks have access to high quality materials that represent them, that represent their world. And so in that, we're mitigating digital redlining by giving students more access to the materials they need to succeed, right? And this has a direct impact on success and retention. But also, when we think about operationalizing this in our teaching, we want to think about going beyond the spotlights and the showcases, right? Where you have like the one image in your class of somebody that is non-normative. And then you say, okay, I've done it. Biology is anti-racist now. And let's think about all the other components that go into teaching biology, like your syllabus, like your policies for your course, like the way that you go about assessment, right? We can think back to that previous webinar that we had here. The way that you even frame the notion of biology, right? Because science can be read different ways through different cultural lenses, and the purpose of it too. And then thinking about these intentional opportunities for folks to make it across the finish line because they feel a sense of belonging and investment in the course material. All right. And honestly, I think this is actually the most radical thing we can do is get more of our students across the finish line, feeling like this material is relevant to their everyday lives. Okay, so breaking news, which is probably not breaking news. That, hey, there's some struggles happening across the country right now. And this has been going on for some time, but things are ramping up. We're seeing a pushback on ideas about trying to get folks to do some of this critical thinking and critical work, right? So you're seeing, for example, across the country, the prohibition of so-called divisive concepts. And I want us to think about why thinking about other people and trying to expand our sense of empathy would be divisive. That's sort of interesting, right? But it's interesting that you might hear the word DEI and perceive it within your mind as divisive, division, loss of opportunity, right? And California is not exempt from this, right? We've had folks suing our community college system for some of the DEIA competencies that are now being asked of instructors and community college districts, right? So we need to kind of think of ourselves as part of this mix. And, even a professor here is sort of saying, like, how is it possible that I might bring an alternative perspective to teaching about chemistry? That's preposterous, right? But here in this program, we're trying to do the work of figuring out how to make some of these changes in ways that are practical for ourselves and our students, and that can be lasting and sustainable, but also that students can kind of take these and run with it, right? And that's what I think is so powerful about open pedagogy too. So we're in a situation where academic freedom is quickly becoming a proxy for resistance to making change and to even just trying different ideas. We're also seeing that some of these terms that we're talking about as principles in this work are unanalyzed and regarded as divisive terms. And then folks are kind of leaning on this idea of meritocracy, like if you earn it, then you deserve it, right? And not necessarily thinking about the opportunity gaps that are making access different for different groups of people. So now that we're in a situation where there's a proliferation of all of these laws to focus on the transformations that we'd like to make, where do we go from here, right? What do we do? And this is where I think this program can be really, really powerful, right? Because what we're doing is we don't necessarily have to call it anti-racism to do anti-racist things. And I think that's something that we want to kind of hang on to, that the medium is the message, or it can be the message. And I like this quote. I know that it sort of originated with a different purpose to kind of talk about the proliferation of communication and emerging media. But I like the idea that we can lead by example and walk the walk. So here's, for example, a meeting agenda that I had some time ago in my role as dean. And within the agenda, I was sort of asking folks to think about the flyer that they are putting together for their class or the syllabus and how to add their instructor kind of summary or a friendly photo as part of that, right? Trying to take transformative steps in a way that folks can find to be approachable and practical, right? So in this, we want to consider the messaging and try to embed within this a sense of what we can do moving forward. And let me just, okay. So let's go forward now with another activity. You're going to see a map, and I will also share a link afterwards to this map. No need to type or write anything here on the map or anything like that. What I want you to do, though, is to try to come up with answers to 3 questions. What area of the world do you think is represented by this map? Can you decode what you're seeing and come up with a word for the easterly direction? And think about how this map makes you feel. Okay, is everybody ready? All right, let's check it out. Here is the map. What do you see? What is the word for east? How does this map make you feel? Okay, so just take another minute. All right. And then when you get some ideas, let's go ahead and add those in the chat. And I can kind of get a sense that some of you are like, what the heck? All right. Someone said the Gulf of America. And you know what? You might be right. I don't know. I don't know. All right. So some of you are kind of coming up with this, right? The Great Lakes I'm seeing, Wabang as east. And if you kind of thought about those things there, then you would be correct. Okay. Turtle Island. Ooh, you would be correct. All right. So I like to think about this activity kind of in tune with the previous webinar from Husna and colleagues, right? Talking about how can we bring indigeneity more intentionally into our curriculum, right? And when you have a map like this in front of you, yeah, I think you do want to feel like you can read the language. And I think that's inspiring for students to think about the fact that we rely on English so much. We rely on a northernly orientation so much. And these are some of the things that anchor us into a Euro-Western perspective without even kind of thinking about it. These are assumptions that we live by, right? So to have a feeling that there's more out there, and also that there were place names in these areas before European contact, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And it's really interesting and it gets a conversation going. So think about the transformative strategies that you can incorporate in your class. What's the equivalent of a decolonial map for your teaching subject? And how might you kind of co-create some of this content, if possible, or even brainstorm with your students, right? Because this is a way to bring in an open pedagogy here. And I think this map and others like it sort of challenge us to think in a different way when we're thinking about place, when we're thinking about language, and when we're thinking about the ownership of lands, right? Okay, so now I kind of wanted to give you a sense of how I incorporate something like this within my own class. And this is sort of interesting because there's a lot of different ways you could do this. But the way I do it is really akin to how we just had it here in this moment is I present students with the questions and I say, hey, can you bring some of the concepts that we have learned in the class so far to your analysis of what you see in the map? And the result is I get students responding again from what they know, from their eyes and ears, right? And personal experience, but also realizing that they can kind of decode this based on what they do already understand. Right. So indigenous culture such as Ojibwe doesn't have to be so esoteric, right? It's not in the past, it's right now. And at the same time, you may encounter some Native American or indigenous students in your classes who can then respond and feel included and legitimized in their response to some of this material as well. Right. Students also feeling, hey, I actually feel good about encountering this in the class, even though I was totally disoriented in the beginning. Right. And talking about what that disorientation is and where it comes from, right? This idea that we can actually do some work to uncover how much we rely on these different ways of seeing the world, right? And you can kind of translate this into the things and assumptions that we rely on for almost any teaching subject, right? Notions of why the world is the way it is or why it has to be that way, right? When I'm thinking about hair textures, for example, I've noticed in recent years, we've gone away necessarily in mainstream from like words like kinky or nappy when it comes to more highly textured hair. But now we have like a numbering system. So we might have like the number 1 all the way up through the number 4, right? And, you know, my Laney colleagues can kind of correct me on this if I'm wrong, but the 1 number seems to be associated with the less textured hairstyles, natural hair, whereas the 4 is the more textured. But what if we flip the number system, right? What if the most textured hair came first and the least textured hair came after that, right? It's thinking about primacy and where we put priority, even with the way that we've numbered things. So some of this stuff is just insidious because it just creeps in. We think we've gone to the next step because we're using less offensive words, but we're still doing a thing with classification. All right. So here's a view of my course kind of in action, right? We're seeing like the separate modules kind of all tied together and everything. And one of the things I wanted to sort of show you was how I kind of put all of this into action, right? So it's really common in linguistics classes, for example, to start with phonology and phonetics and all of that stuff. But actually what I start with is linguistic racism, right? I start with deaf communities, deaf people of color, and the tools they use, the languages they use, and we talk about accents and we talk about difference right away, so that students can go ahead and start jumping in with their personal experiences in this class. I think that's really effective. So now let's kind of spend just a moment dabbling in some of this material so that you can experience it as well. So we're just going to spend a couple of seconds with this video. I want you to kind of think about what you might notice with the video. How does it make you feel? And any reactions you have, please feel free to share those in the chat. And before we get going, I'm just going to, I think, share a couple more resources with you. I think I gave you a link to the map, and now I'll give you a link to this video as well. Okay. And so you may also notice that the video has already begun. But note that there is no sound on this video. So for some students, it's already disorienting to be watching a video without sound, right? But this is another way to step into the world of someone else, right? And to kind of get an appreciation for other ways of perceiving and connecting, right? All right. So thinking about this, right, we know that communication now involves both gestures, however you say it, and signs from signed languages. So which of these is important? Which of these means important? A, B, or C? Let's see if you can add that to the chat. And I'm really appreciating your comments in the chat. Thank you all. All right, so let's see maybe what the answer is here. Which one means important? If you chose C, you would be correct. So now I want to share another quick video with you so that we can see that sign in action. And this sort of comes from some of the LA County COVID coverage.
To economic and racial justice.
Police brutality has come to the forefront, and more people in America are understanding the importance of this movement. Deaf people want to be involved in this. I try to be sensitive and see what the deaf community is using and not just kind of, oh, it's this, and take ownership of that language. It's not my language. No justice, no peace. Basically, that phrase, your knee on my neck, looks like this. This is actually the knee on the neck. And so when you see that, it's like, oh, wow. The sign for white, as in like the color, crayon color, is white, but white people is signed like that. If you're talking about a white person, so why do white people have a different sign than the color? But traditionally, it's just been black the color, black the people, black this, black that. We've had one sign. But I became aware probably about 5 years ago, we're gonna make our own sign like this, black. So because I'm black, I would sign black like this. As a person who's not black, the sign should be this. And that's out of respect to the black culture, out of respect to the struggle. So I would sign Black Lives. You might also see people sign lives using that letter L hand shape. And then you might see matter. This is how I sign matter, which actually means like cherish, adore, treasure. And you might see some people sign it like this, which means important or worthy. But I would sign Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Deafness is not a white disability. It's not a white culture. So when you have an event, for example, like what's going on now with the revolution, with the protesting, with Black Lives Matter, and it's only coming through a white voice, it lacks that power, it lacks that cultural nuance, it lacks the complexities that someone who's black would be able to bring to the table. There are deaf people amongst us all day, every day, and they're speaking out. They have things to say. They have things that they want to learn. It's not about the interpreter, it's about the deaf community and what it is that they want to say, and people aren't listening.
So you just had a different experience there. We had deaf folks sharing of themselves, and then we went to an interpreter, and we had vocal language, we had background music as well. So the contrast of those sometimes can help us to kind of see what our expectations really are, right? And I appreciate what Rory Burton was saying here, because these distinctions in language really make a difference, right? These distinctions between the signs for Black, the color, and Black, the collective identity, and then also in our written language, right? A lowercase and uppercase, lowercase I for Indigenous in general, and uppercase I for indigeneity, the identity, right? So where I sort of include this in my course is in week 2. So I'm really jumping right on in with students to get them to think about the people around them, who they are, and how all of this influences their lives, right? And trying to get them to really appreciate the ways that hearing and deaf communities work together, right? This kind of coalition building is so important across anything that we're doing, any sort of social groups and social distinctions. And so change is not easy, right? So what I found is that a gradual approach where I include some repetition really brings students and walks students into understanding why I'm taking the perspective that I am, in bringing them the same fundamental concepts they would get from another course on the same subject, but I'm trying to do it with a lens that is focused on transformation, that's focused on their everyday lives, and it's focused on the actual society we live in, which where difference is important. It's important for opportunity. So once I've kind of introduced this in different ways, then I get to my more explicit discussion of intersectionality. And I try to bring in folks that go beyond the binary. So beyond Black and white, that traditional binary that's empowered by white supremacy, let's bring in folks from other regions, other places, other points of view. And so here we have a Japanese Canadian scholar talking about intersectionality. And as a result, then you get different types of messages, right? From students that find that, hey, this is working for me. I absolutely love this. I'm so glad, right? And sometimes these types of messages begin to outweigh the detractor messages, right? Because now we've done also a better job of building a foundation for why we're moving in this direction with the material. And part of what we're doing in that work is we're trying to shift the scope of what is considered legitimate knowledge in the course, right? So we're pushing back on this notion of epistemological racism, epistemology being ways of knowing, right? So if there's racism embedded in our ways of knowing, then we may not even know that we don't know, right? So if we broaden the scope of who we're relying on and where we're grabbing the information, then it stands to reason that we can broaden our understanding and appreciation of different forms of information. And so I want to share with you now just this last set of resources that I'm sharing here. And one of these includes a link to my chapter, which is talking about how I roll out these strategies in my own teaching in the community college setting, specific to linguistics, but I think there's some stuff that's helpful across the board. And as I kind of wrap here, I wanted us to sort of be able to think about how what we do in the classroom, whether we're in person or we're online with Canvas, et cetera, how that's an affective experience. It's emotional. It can't help but be, right? Because we're human beings. And so even the way that we present an affirmation, a kudos in our class, can impact the way our students feel, right? So even the skin tone of the thumb I have there, right? That's intentional to make it brown. Most of my students are brown. Um, and so I want them to feel affirmed by what they're experiencing in the class. And so at the same time that I'm trying to choose knowledge sources that are adding to our perspective, I'm also trying to choose visuals that can assist with that as well. Right. So this extends to the syllabus, right, as an opportunity to try to welcome students in with warm language and warm visuals where they can see themselves, right? And we can't forget the impact of course policies in helping us do this too, right? If you're able to embed some flexibility in what you're doing or to word your policies in a way where the punitive language kind of goes away and you're really left with what you actually mean by that policy, which is, hey, I really care about your success. That's why we've got a structure to this class, right? And to help me help you, I really do need you to turn in things on time. But if you're having trouble, reach out to me so that we can talk about it and figure out a way forward, right? Something like that, I think, can really be helpful. These images that we're talking about, thinking about folks with disabilities, people of color, different configurations of group and family, all of that can really be helpful, I think. And then scaffolding the information. When you're trying to do something transformative, if you can gradually do a buildup with some repetition, I think that really does help the rollout of this stuff. And so in that regard, we kind of have a little bit of a ladder of strategies here that we can use to help us with students and help us with our teaching. And so when we get some of these emails from students, right, where they're talking about who they are, they're worried that this class is Marxist and Maoist and challenging who they are, and because they're not ready to let go of the privilege that they've gained by focusing only on themselves, right? But now we can see that. We can see that. And so when we receive an email like this, yes, it's unnerving. But it's particularly unnerving because the student then goes on to sort of say, well, can I just have a whole set of alternative assignments? Can you do more work, professor? Right? Which is insane, right? even though I appreciate you and you're great and all that, right? So then what do, right? Do you immediately respond with an angry mind? Do you ask for help? What do, right? What would you do? And so what did I do? Well, I wrote back and I said, hey, well, actually, I think this is a student writing to me, another student writing to me, sort of saying like, hey, your class is too ideological. I can't handle it, right? So I wrote back and I said, hey, I'm glad you're receiving my feedback and you're taking the time to appreciate that. That's good, right? But I'm writing back with the express intention of not getting bogged down in the here or there of the detractor focus, right? Let's just focus on your success in this class, right? Let's focus on the facts of when things are due or what the questions actually are, and let me help you with that. Right. So kind of pulling it back to the center. And that works. That works for the students who are ready for it. And that also works for the students who are detractors, right? Because they'll come back and sort of say, well, you know what, I actually am liking this class, right? And I have had that experience where then you don't give them any more fuel to add to the flames, right? So just a couple of other strategies, right? Right. And Trish, using the syllabus and the welcome message, I'm sort of talking about presenting early on in the class that you have compassion and care for your students and you want them to succeed, right? And that's for all of your students. So here on this slide, I'm just kind of talking about when we're wanting to present some challenging material, that I think it's helpful to include citations in with your slides so that folks can know if they try to take this out of context, where you're coming from, right? So here I'm talking about an incident that happened at UCLA some years ago where students were referred to with the offensive phrase ching chong. But I want to be clear that it's not me originating that phrase and that it's from somewhere else. So that's where I include the citation, right? So that this slide cannot be taken out of context later. So going back to some of those strategies, kind of emphasizing that success of all students is your central and authentic goal. And when you've got detractors circling, right? Oh, and thinking about the time, of course. Want to make sure that we're thinking about the support mechanisms that you may have at your college. Should the harassment and intimidation become sustained, have somebody that you can share with and document those repeated occurrences so that you have your own records. And this is important just to protect yourself. And then another resource that you have is system-wide memos, data, and definitions, such as like the Chancellor's Executive Summary and DEIA definitions that are available through the Academic Senate, statewide Academic Senate for DEIA terms. You can use those when you're doing some of this work. So now I've kind of finished here, and I just kind of want to open it up for the last few seconds here for some of your thoughts. And I just, again, really appreciate you and appreciate your time. So thank you so much. All right, so I will just pause my screen share, okay?
Thanks, Jamie. That was great. We only have about 3 minutes left, so we would have time for maybe one question before we show you a couple of QR codes before we head off to the weekend. Questions? Okay, all right. Oop. Hi, Jamie. This is your paper. I'll send out links to the resources along with the slides.
Okay, well, everybody, thanks so much for being here. Thanks, Jamie. And please give us some feedback. Scan this QR code, give us a quick little feedback on today's session. We really appreciate it. We can't stress enough how seriously we take your feedback, and the program evolves every year. I know, folks like Jamie who've been with us from the beginning can confirm things change a little bit every year. We keep evolving. So please do let us know how you're experiencing everything. Next slide, please. Whoops. And just a reminder about communications and support. Check your email settings so that communications from OFAR are not getting stuck in your spam folders. If you have questions about the course, of course, naturally contact Jamie, Maritez, Joy, and Kim. If you're having particular challenges, feel free to communicate with your team lead and or the coach directly, and the coach hopefully is going to give you the appropriate support and feedback. And if necessary, the coach will elevate questions to Laura and myself. All the fun paperwork stuff, contracts, invoicing, Laura is kindly responding to those questions. And a reminder again, OER support available through College of the Canyons. And it's always a good practice just to email both me and Laura so that we're sure that your questions and inquiries are not getting lost. Stay in the loop with CCC OER, our parent organization, and see their website for the under the Get Involved menu. Learn about upcoming OER conferences and events all over the place. Sign up for the CCC OER community email, which is a very active email list, but the primary email list about OER in teaching-focused institutions in the whole world, actually. So it's a great email list. And then check out the blog posts and all kinds of great resources on the CCC OER website. And with that, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jamie. I learn every time. So thank you. I've seen your presentation how many times, but it changes and changes constantly. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll be tapping in, Jamie.
Thank you so much. I will as well, Jamie.
Awesome.
And
everybody.
again,
I hope you all have a
special shout out to our Pasadena friends. Thank you so much for taking time to be here. Hope that you're back in your homes, or we'll be back soon. And yeah, our hearts go out to y'all.
Thanks, everybody.